It is that time of week again, everyone. Time for the week 3. How did we get to week 3 already of the college football season? Welcome into the college football YouTube channel. I am Matt Barrie. We'll do this every week. We'll sit here on a Tuesday or Wednesday and we'll preview and talk about the games coming up this week. Also want to remind you, Sunday is also a big day here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. Right out of the gate, instant reaction with me and Paul Feinbaum. Sunday mornings, late mornings. We'll get into everything we saw on Saturday, some of the bigger topics. This last week, of course, we were hinting around Scott Frost. And then later in the afternoon, he got fired. We'll talk about that today on the week 3 preview. But we've got Feinbaum and me Sunday mornings, plus Sunday, Bloody Sunday, where we sit, we share a Bloody Mary, we laugh, cry, debate, talk about the day that was in college football. So much good content being pumped out here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel. It's been a good 3 weeks so far. Let's continue that momentum as we build towards the end of September. As I said a second ago, I can't believe we're already at week 3. Seems like we were just at week 0 and I was in Chapel Hill calling the North Carolina game. Who knew they were going to be that entertaining? But here we are, mid-September, week 3. And I say this all of the time, being on Sports Center, on College Football Final, or when I'm doing a radio interview with someone, there really isn't such thing as a bad college football schedule. Does that make sense? If you look at last week, I don't think anyone, you had Kentucky, Florida. That was a marquee game. BYU, Baylor at night. That was a ranked matchup. But we didn't have that show pony, star-studded Ohio State, Notre Dame. And so people kind of wrote it off saying, week 2, nothing's great. Well, when things like that happen, you get 3 Sunbelt teams, Appalachian State, Georgia Southern, and Marshall pulling off historic upsets. So anytime you overlook a schedule, you're going to find something that pops out you didn't think was coming. I think that's where we are with this week. The treetops in the first game that I'll hit on is Texas A&M and Miami. Now, it doesn't take a television executive wizard to figure out that A&M obviously lost College Game Day, losing to Appalachian State. Had they beat App State, you'd have a top 10 A&M team hosting an up-and-coming Mario Cristobal coached Miami team. A&M loses. Game day goes to Boone, which congratulations to Appalachian State. They deserve every bit of the attention they're going to get this week, which, by the way, also on the YouTube channel, my interview with head coach Sean Clark from Sports Center yesterday. But Tuesday, rather. I don't want to date this for the people watching this on Friday. But now you have A&M and Miami, and it's a big week. And I'll tell you why it's big. Because Texas A&M is not paying Jimbo Fisher maybe like a Dave Dorn. And that's no disrespect to Dave Dorn and his salary. But what I'm saying is he's not being paid as coach 13, 14, 15 in the country. He's being paid $90 and $100 million in that range as a top 3 or 4 paid coach in the country. And through 50 games, I don't think anyone was going to be sitting here saying, you know what? Through 50 games, I bet Jimbo Fisher is 1 win less than Kevin Sumlin. They weren't paying for that kind of production. They were paying for Texas A&M to not only be a top 10 team, be fighting for the SEC West, be fighting for an SEC championship, and playing for a college football playoff berth. And that hasn't happened. He signed the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the country. Texas A&M had all kinds of hype coming into the season. And now you're talking about the real possibility. If they come up short against Miami, you guys know how this works in college football. It starts as a whisper. Oh, he's underperforming. He's not doing great. Whispers become a conversation. Conversation in this sport becomes screaming. And Jimbo Fisher was not looking at the schedule this year and pointing to last weekend at Appalachian State, thinking that would be a hiccup. But here we are. And now Miami comes in with Mario Cristobal. They're 2-0. They were borderline overlooking Southern Miss last week. It wasn't the greatest start for them. They finally figured it out, and I think the score's 30-7, somewhere around there. They finally got rid of Southern Miss. But now you've got a program and a guy in Mario Cristobal back at his alma mater who's trying to establish that culture of the U again. What better opportunity for him and that team on a national television audience, 9 p.m. Eastern, ESPN? What better opportunity for Mario to bring what he's trying to build into College Station, hostile environment, national television audience to say, you know what? We are headed where I think this thing's capable of going. You do that against Texas A&M, who's a little wobbly right now. It makes for a fascinating story. There are people that think maybe Jimbo should pull off a Haynes King at starting quarterback and put in the LSU transfer Max Johnson. I had my good friend Roddy Jones with me on SportsCenter today, and he was saying, hey, look, yeah, you could make a change at quarterback, but right now it's the offensive line. And Haynes gives them the best opportunity to run. Max Johnson's not known as a runner. He's a pocket passer, left-handed kid, very accurate, but can't run. And maybe that's a lot of why Jimbo's sticking with Haynes. But when you look at the overarching storyline of A&M Miami, keep this in mind. Jimbo Fisher now is trying to get people to buy into this hype of what he's getting paid. They got him from Florida State, and it just hasn't taken off yet. They were 4-4 in the SEC last year, but because they beat Alabama, people forgot about it. And so this one's huge. It's huge because Miami's trying to build, and Jimbo Fisher is trying to let people believe. And so the loser of this one, look, if Miami loses, it's year one of Mario. They're going to be fine. If Texas A&M loses, it's like I said a second ago, a whisper turns into a conversation, turns into a yell. And so keep an eye on A&M Miami, 9 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. It's kind of a segue to the next game, Oklahoma, Nebraska, one of the more traditional rivalries in college football history that we hadn't seen as much lately because of conference realignment. But I love Oklahoma, Nebraska for one reason and one reason only. It's a chance to see who both of these teams really are. And I say that because Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel's been okay. Brent Venables comes in. He's been all right. But Oklahoma hasn't done anything through the first couple of weeks. They're ranked 6th in the country. And it's just kind of been silent, right? We haven't had a big Oklahoma conversation because they really haven't given us a reason to give them a huge national conversation. But they get that this week with Nebraska. The obvious storyline there is because after we got off air on the YouTube channel on Sunday, Scott Frost gets fired because it just never worked out. And I'm stunned by how bad this Scott Frost thing went in Nebraska. And so now they're forced. They get a decision on their hands moving forward. Mickey Joseph, he's the interim head coach. He'll take over. He's publicly said, look, I'm coaching right now to get this job. Former Nebraska guy. We'll see if it works out. But if you're Nebraska, if you're Trev Alberts, if you're this program, you're sitting here thinking, well, wait a minute. We brought home one of our own. We brought home a quarterback who led us to national championship heights. This was the guy that was going to resuscitate Nebraska football. If not Scott Frost, then who? If not a guy that understands the culture of Lincoln and the culture of Nebraska football, if not him, if he can't get it done, who can? And so Oklahoma needs to be careful trotting into Nebraska for that simple reason. You have a program who's been doubted nationally, who's been publicly embarrassed by the fact that they had to fire their coach after week 3 for them. Remember, they played week 0. And so now all eyes are on them. And typically everyone asks, well, what's a team going to be like after the coach gets fired? It's a very telling sign if the team comes out and competes and wins, because that means there was stuff going on inside the walls that just wasn't working. And so if Nebraska comes out motivated, comes out fired up, has something to prove, wants to win for the interim coach, maybe even at some level wants to win for Scott Frost, Oklahoma could be in a tough position. So watch out for Oklahoma and Nebraska. Twofold: one, the Nebraska storyline with Scott Frost. Part 2, who is Dylan Gabriel with Jeff Lebby in Oklahoma and Brent Venables. Looking forward to seeing that one on Saturday. Kind of a random matchup in that it's 2-2-0 teams. But again, they're not really getting much conversation. Penn State and Auburn meet up. There was the classic at Penn State Auburn A year ago, I believe it was the whiteout, and the whiteout at Penn State's one of the great atmospheres in the entire sport. But Auburn comes in undefeated. TJ Finley, their starting quarterback. The attempted coup on Brian Harsin in the offseason, which was still one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard of. But he survives the coup, survives the attempted coup, has Auburn 2-0 against Penn State and James Franklin. Sean Clifford at quarterback. They lose some weapons to the NFL. They still really want to run the ball. And you're going to get to know these guys. And if I had to put a theme for week 3, remember in week 2, I said, well, let's get an idea, emotion week 1. How do you handle a letdown potential in week 2? Well, here's week 3 and kind of get to know who you are. Like, let's get to know who the real Oklahoma is. Let's get to know who Miami is. Let's get to know who Penn State and Auburn are. Both of them 2-0. Both of them want an opportunity to say, hey, we're still here. We win national championships at these programs. And if Brian Harsin, look, the Brian Harsin thing's bizarre. The AD's gone. They've got an interim AD. Watch out for Auburn and Penn State. Keep an eye on what this game is and how each team looks, because a la Jimbo Fisher, if Auburn comes in and just doesn't look good, I mean, they're not even whispering at Auburn anymore. It's completely obvious what they're looking to do. So Penn State, Auburn, 2-2-0 teams. I love an SEC and a Big Ten matchup. Be a fun one to watch. Next game, Mississippi State, LSU. Mike Leach, one of the more entertaining coaches in the country because of the offense he runs, because of his quotes, his social media behavior. Everything about him is just absolutely perfect. Just a first-rate legend. They go late kickoff last week in Tucson against Arizona, get the win. Could have been a trap game for them, and it wasn't. Now they get LSU. Last time we talked LSU was week 1 against Florida State. We're all very well aware of how that game ended. Last week, they had Southern. It wasn't going to be if they were going to win. It was going to be by how much. And so now here's Brian Kelly, ESPN, National Spotlight, gets a chance to get in conference his first SEC game against Mississippi State. And maybe with a win, with Jayden Daniels at quarterback, maybe they found something last week against Southern. If they go into conference and get a win, there's a chance some of that Brian Kelly conversation, which was way too early in week 1, but that's just the way college football is. Maybe that goes away a little bit. Maybe he can get them to 2-1. Maybe they look effective against Mississippi State, who's got a decent defense, and that turns things around for LSU. Conversely, Mississippi State's in one of those situations where they're kind of waiting for that Mike Leach jump. If they get the win against LSU Saturday, kind of the same thing. And so it follows the trend of today's preview and show. Who's LSU under Brian Kelly? Who's Jayden Daniels in the SEC? Who's Mike Leach and what Mississippi State has offensively? We know they're going to sling it all over the yard. And they had a great performance last week at Arizona. Mississippi State, LSU in conference. Sign me up for all SEC football on Saturday between these two. Now, we had talked earlier about what it takes to build a program. I mentioned it with A&M coming up short recently under Jimbo Fisher, but then Mario Cristobal at the beginning of his journey at Miami, how Scott Frost wasn't able to do it at Nebraska. I find this week's game for Texas as important as any game they'll play this season. Well, Matt, they just played Alabama. Yeah, they probably should have won. I get that. But Texas UTSA is a game to watch to see if Sark and the Longhorns have finally grown up back into Texas football. Because last week, you lose your star quarterback in Quinn Ewers, by the way, out 5 to 6 weeks with the collarbone injury. But you lose him against Alabama, and according to some, the best Alabama team Nick Saban's had. And you probably should have won it. You missed opportunities in the red zone. Instead of scoring touchdowns, you scored field goals. And if you look at that game as a whole, you're thinking, well, wait, Texas should have and could have beaten Alabama. And that's why this week's game against UTSA is so important. If Texas is, in fact, Texas football again, they will do what needs to be done against UTSA. And Jeff Traylor's got a great thing going at San Antonio. He really does. That is a good roster. That is a good team. They're one of the last teams I'd like to line up and play, which makes it a good test for Texas because it's a team good enough in UTSA to get your attention, but it's a team talent-wise that you should beat just about every Saturday all year. And if Sark has these guys believe it in Texas football, if the mindset's changed, the discipline's changed, the talent, if that's changed, they'll be good with forgetting about Alabama and a game they should have won to moving on to the next Saturday and beating a team like UTSA. So keep an eye on how Texas looks. Watch for, do they come out sluggish? Do they come out upset-minded, hungover? You know Hudson Card's not going to. Hudson Card, no, this is his opportunity with Quinn Ewers out to kind of show that he's still a very good college quarterback. Texas UTSA, again, it's not going to get the marquee, but it is going to get the attention of college football people to see if Sark has Texas headed in the right direction. And the last game I want to touch on today, and the last thing I want to touch on, it's more about a player than it is the game. Michigan and UConn. Love Jim Moore Jr., former colleague of ours, but it's going to be a name your score game for Michigan when UConn travels to the Big House. The reason I want to hone in on this is because Jim Harbaugh did a very unique thing to start the season. He gave Cade McNamara, starting quarterback a year ago, led them to the Big Ten championship and a college football playoff berth, let him start week 1 against Colorado State. Week 2, last week against Hawaii, he let J.J. McCarthy have the start and then said after 2 weeks, I'll name a starting quarterback. Then Harbaugh says on Sunday, based on merit, that J.J. McCarthy was going to be our starting quarterback going forward. So this is the first week of the season that Jim Harbaugh said, you know what? J.J. McCarthy's our guy. And anyone you talk to, when I'm with Jesse and Joey on Saturdays, again, I bring up my guy, Rodney Jones. Dan Orlovsky talks about it as well. Anybody who looks at the Michigan offense knows it looks different when JJ's at starting quarterback, even when he's in prior in his 3, 4, 5 packages, 5-play packages, maybe a series are here. It just looks different. And the one thing Michigan was missing, they had the defense last year, Aiden Hutchinson. They got the defense again this year. But the one thing that's been missing with Harbaugh and this offense has been punch, big play punch. And the fact that he gave the job to J.J. McCarthy says to me, he knows J.J., while Cade's good, J.J.'s got the potential to be great. And if Michigan can ramp up that offense just enough, the speed of it, the way that they attack it, plays downfield, a quarterback who's dangerous both with his arm and his legs, if they can find a way to attack this and be aggressive and make you start going, wow, offensively, look, we know they can run the ball, but what kind of quarterback player are they going to get? J.J. McCarthy gives Michigan a real chance to repeat as Big Ten champions. I know Ohio State probably top to bottom, a little more talented, but J.J. McCarthy, week 1 of being Michigan's full-time starting quarterback, they're going to beat UConn. Got it. Look at the numbers. Look at the offense. Look at how Michigan feels offensively coming out of this week, and it'll give me and everybody else a really good indication of who Michigan will be the rest of the way. So again, don't look at the schedule and say you don't have games to watch. I just gave you the games. A&M Miami, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Penn State, Auburn, Mississippi State, LSU. Where does Sark have Texas? And where does J.J. McCarthy have Michigan? I promise you this. At some point on Sunday, whether it's Feinbaum and I recapping a busy Saturday, or we're doing our Sunday Bloody Sunday and breaking it all down together, one of those storylines that I just highlighted heading into week 3, there will be something within that we are discussing on Sunday morning, because I guarantee once we wake up Sunday, we're tired. Most of you probably hungover. We're going to get like, man, yesterday was crazy. You want to know why? Because it's college football and it's the greatest thing on the planet. Thanks again for watching the week 3 preview here on the ESPN College Football YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.